So, welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English, and today we have a special guest. Today we have a special guest, and her name is Lisa Boswell, and she's a divination teacher. And are you living in Scotland? Is that right?
Yeah, I live in Scotland.
Fabulous. So we're going to go through Lisa's chart today, and she is a gypsy. She is a professional psychic, and we're going to go through her chart, and we're going to be asking her lots of questions. So, Lisa, when did you find out that you were first psychic?
I think that I always knew. When I was maybe about 3 or 4, my mum had a dream that I had a third eye on the back of my head. And my family members had took that as a sign that I was psychic. So I've just always seen spirits, always had like a really strong interest in divination. A lot of my family members are fortune tellers as well. So it wasn't like it was something that wasn't actively encouraged or anything like that. So I think my culture did have a lot to do with it. But to be honest with you, I really like to think that I would be doing the same thing, even if I was brought up in a different culture.
Yeah, okay. So what was your first form of divination that you used? Did you start with cards or tea leaves, or where did you begin?
Well, I actually started with tarot cards because I have an older sister who read tarot cards, and I was just so interested in all the different pictures. And this sounds really weird, but the fact that they had like a death card and a devil card, and I just thought that was so strange. Like, so I was more so drawn to that. My interest in, say, crystal ball reading and dream interpretation, that came a couple of years later.
Hmm.
So that came after my interest in tarot. I think I was more drawn to tarot because of the artwork than anything else.
Oh, the pictures that were on the cards, yeah?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because I've got a couple of decks of tarot and I have read them in the past, but I think it's 70 something cards and I can't remember them all. I have to keep checking them, but I use playing cards, which are a lot easier. So deep respect for you. And then there's another deck that you use. It's not tarot, I can't remember the name of it. They're French. What are they
Lenormand.
called?
Lenormand cards.
How do you say it?
Lenormand.
Lenormand.
Yeah.
Right,
I
30.
learned I learned Lenormand as an adult, and I found it a lot easier to learn Lenormand than Tarot because there's half as many cards. So there's
Yeah,
36 cards in Lenormand and 78 in Tarot.
right.
So yeah, but a lot of Lenormand was actually based on uh, tea leaf reading
Hmm.
historically. So when you already have an understanding of certain symbols or whatever, learning Lenormand is quite easy. Whereas
Right.
Tarot was based more so on their own its own concepts. So say like temperance or the magician or the
Mhm.
symbolism is just different.
Yes, I mean that's the thing about playing cards. I mean, I learned from a book when I was 13 in 1973. My Catholic mother, can you believe, bought a book on reading fortunes from cards when we were on holiday, and I read the deck, and I read for a friend of mine, and she got the king, she got the death card, and she got the initial G or J, and I went, oh, I don't want. She said, oh, my uncle Jack just died, and it's like, oh my God, this is my first reading I've ever done, and it's true, you know. So that was really what convinced me into it. But it's
It's funny you should say that because up here it's mostly Catholics that go for readings. They seem to be really interested in it up
how
here.
funny.
My fiance's family are Catholics, and all of them have all been for readings, and they all like it. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite strange. Yeah,
Well, it's crazy because in the Catholic faith, you know, you're not allowed to do those sorts of things. But my
yeah,
auntie, who was a very religious Catholic person, I'm always waffling on about her. She was terribly into astrology, and I've still got her ephemeris, the book of tables of her astrology that she
yeah.
had, and my birth date is written in there. You know, and she was like, you know, proper practicing Catholic. But anyway, let's not get into religion. So you've got your own YouTube channel. You're
Yeah,
also on Instagram and you're
yeah,
teaching tarot, yes?
yeah. I teach Lenormand too, tarot
And
and Lenormand.
oh, okay, both. Oh, cool. Okay, so let's just have a look. We're going to have a little skip around your chart. I'll stick it in the chat because I do a slightly different version. I use a system called Equal House, which
Mm.
means that all the houses are the same size, as opposed to, hold on, let me just put that in there, as opposed to on other methods. So the default on every website is something called Placidus, which
Yeah,
came later on. So I use an older system of astrology. And your chart starts in the sign of Pisces. So do you know what ascendant means?
Yeah, that's the sign on the horizon
Yeah.
when you're born. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that is the sign of psychic. Pisces is a more psychic type of sign, but you've got a very clustered chart. I looked at your chart and I went, oh, super, because you've got all your planets all squished together in 3 houses, and then you've got one planet in opposition to something else. So we'd call that a clustered chart. It's actually called a bucket chart because you've got the bowl of the bucket at the top and the handle of the bucket at the bottom. And your sun sign is Aquarius. And what I thought was very interesting in your chart is your sun, the sun, which is who you are, doesn't aspect or have any conversation with any other planet in your chart other than some weird, I think there's some inconjuncts or something. But basically, that who you are doesn't communicate with the other parts of your chart. Okay, no aspects between it, whilst everything else in your chart all chats to each other. So it's as if you're living in 2 worlds. So there's you, Lisa, the person, then there's all these other things that go on, but the 2 parts of you aren't so conscious to each other. Okay, so the sun is who we are, and that's how we go into the world. And your Aquarius, freedom loving, doesn't particularly like being told what to do, wants to do their own thing. And then your moon, which is your emotional self, is in Capricorn, so you're quite stoic, so you can put up with a lot of SHIT type of thing. And then your Neptune's right next door to your moon. Now that's the psychic signature. So the moon is how we feel, Neptune's the psychic planet, and in your chart they're right next door to each other. And also your Neptune, because you've got this little cluster, your Neptune is also next to your Mercury. So you were mentioning earlier about dream interpretation. Do you have lucid dreams?
Yeah, I do. I noticed when I was very young, even I can remember telling family members that I was in control of my dreams, that I realised that you could be in control of your dreams from like a very, very young age. Like I know when I'm dreaming, I know what's going on. If I don't like the dream, I get out of it. Always
Wow.
been that way. Always.
Oh, lucid dreams. I've had a few and I know how to create one. I don't do it as much as I'd like to, but when you can control a dream, it's marvelous. But some people do it naturally. So you're, oh natural. Aren't you lucky? I'm jealous.
It's funny because my daughter, she has the same ability as well. She can lucid dream as well.
Oh,
And it was
cool.
actually her that had mentioned it to me that she had that ability. I was like, it's a bit strange because I have that ability too.
Oh, wow. So what sign of the zodiac's your daughter?
She's a Sagittarius.
Right. Okay. So does she tell you how it is?
Yeah. But our personalities are actually very alike. You know, we're
Okay.
very, very alike. But there's only 15 years between me and my daughter. So, you know, we are very, very alike.
Yeah, and you're also going to have a young attitude towards life as well if there's only 15 years between you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, me and my son, there's 30 something,
Wow.
you know, and I'm 30 years older than you. So I'm a granny. Well, I'm not a granny because my son hasn't had any kids. Okay, so you've also got Saturn, which is the planet of responsibility. That's very near to your moon as well. So you're emotionally quite sensible. You're less likely to run off the rails type of thing when your moon is near to your Saturn because you'll feel more responsible. And the moon also represents the mother. So your moon planet and your dad planet are very close together. So what signs of the zodiac are your mum and dad? Well, so what's mum?
My mum's a Sagittarius.
Cool.
I think
And
my dad might be a Sagittarius as well.
right, okay. And then your daughter's a Saggy. So what sign's your
Yeah.
partner?
He's a Pisces.
Right, and then you've got a Pisces ascendant. Okay, so that's why you got attracted to each other because of your
Oddly,
ascendant.
but David is the only Pisces that I've ever been with. All my other exes were Capricorns.
Whoa, that's because of all the Capricorn planets you got, probably.
Yeah, I actually think that this sounds so strange, right? But I think that I'd realised after my last relationship before I'd got with my fiance, I
Hmm.
realised that I was going for people whose personalities I saw in myself a lot. Do you
Hmm.
know? So I saw a
Yeah.
lot of their personality traits in like myself. And then David is just a complete opposite of me, you know, in a lot of ways. Other than I would say he is quite intuitive in things as well.
Hmm.
He's a very like intuitive person, um, empathetic person and stuff. He is quite emotional. If I said that to him, he would totally deny it. Like, no, I'm not, but he is. He's a lot, even more so than me. He's
Uh,
more emotional than me, you know, because sometimes I just sit there and I'm like, shut up, you know, when he's going off on one or whatever. But I actually think that me and David's personality types, we suit each other because I've got quite a domineering personality as well. Do you know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's true what he says about like the responsibility thing and stuff. I was quite rebellious as a child. I was a very rebellious child, and then
Child or
after,
teenager?
yeah, and then even as a
Which
child,
child or teenager or both?
both
Right.
as a child and as a teenager. And then I think part of that stemmed from I've always hated people telling me what to do. I've always wanted to do my own thing, stuff like that. And then after I had my daughter, I noticed that maturity wise, I seem to be a lot more mature than, say, like my sisters. So more mature than my twin, more mature than like my, and even now as well, I am like a miniature version of my mum to my sisters. Do you know, like the kinds of things that she would shout at them for, I shout at them for. Do you know, and
Right.
I'm like, sort of so immature, we're like in our 30s. Do you know, I'm like, stop it, grow up. But I think now I've just sort of accepted that that's their personality. I'm not holding out when I'm maturing anytime soon.
Cool. Now there's some nice things going on astrologically for you at the moment. So I've just stuck in the next chart, which I'll pop in the box in a minute, is the transits that are happening at the moment. So this is where the planets are today. So they're on the outside of the circle. Let me just stick. Oopsie. Let me pop that into there. So I'll put those onto the outside. So you've got a very clustered chart. You've got all your planets all in one place. We'll talk about your Jupiter in a minute. But that's where the planets are today, on the outside of the circle. And Neptune, which is the psychic planet, is transiting, going through the sign of Pisces, right over your ascendant. And Jupiter has just caught up with it. Jupiter is the lucky planet. Auntie Mary likes that one because I'm a Pisces myself, so I'm really enjoying it. It'll be there for a few more months and then it will shift into the sign of Aries. But with that going over your ascendant, it is the lucky planet. And to go over your ascendant means you'll start drawing towards you more lucky type of things, which would be good. And it will also help your divination yourself. Yeah, make it more what's the word, more accurate or more fun or bring you more money, or it's a lucky thing. You can't go wrong with Jupiter. Now, the other thing is, I think you've just had a Saturn return. Is that right? So how old are you now?
32.
So you had your Saturn return last year? Is that right? Hold on, let me just go backwards. That's when you sort of astrologically grow up, because Saturn takes nearly 28 to 30 years to go around the zodiac. Actually, it might have been a bit before that. Hold on, let me just move the computer backwards. It was halfway through 2020. So what was going on for you in June 2020? I know we were having the pandemic, but what was going on for you in 2020? What else was happening?
I would say between the summer of 2020 and the summer of 2021, I had this big personality shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was connected to like my business and like my intuition and stuff like that. Now I've always been the type of person that I've always like trusted my intuition and followed like signs and stuff like that. But when it came to like my business and stuff, I used to say enroll in a lot of like business courses or like get help from other like business professionals or whatever. And during that time, I'd got some really, really shit advice from that I'd actually paid a lot of money for it. I'd paid like 10 grand for this advice. And it had actually had a negative effect, like real negative effect on my business. It was just awful.
Oh my Lord.
And it sort of helped me to realize that that you can't buy the kind of advice that you can get from your own intuition, if
Oh
that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yes.
There's just nothing that's superior to that. And a lot of things that I'd been told was counterintuitive to my intuition. Do you know what I mean? But I'd sort of push through it because I'm like, well, I paid for this advice and stuff like that. And it helped me to realize that, and I've been getting different forms of help for my business for the last like 10 years. And to be honest with you, a lot of the time I've never really been happy with it. That sounds terrible, but I've not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me to realise that my intuition was just the best thing. Do you know, like that I didn't need the help of anyone else really to like grow my business or anything like that, because deep down I did know what was best, do you know, for like me, for my business, for my students, for my courses, for even like my book and things. That was another thing as well, is that my book was
Oh yes, tell us about
was
your book.
published
What's
too.
the title?
Modern Oracle.
Right. And who's it published by?
It's published by, in the UK, it's Lawrence King, which is an imprint of, is it pronounced, sorry, I can't pronounce it, it's like Hachette.
Oh, I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, I always call it
Yeah.
hatchets, but I could be completely wrong.
Yeah.
So don't worry.
Anytime, it doesn't matter who I pronounce it to, they look at me funny. They
Right.
do. They look at me funny. And I've got a speech impediment, is what it is, right? So that was another thing that happened during that time as well. I had speech therapy. So that
Mhm.
was another thing that has happened. But yeah, so people just look at me strange when I pronounce that that's the publisher's name, but what can you do?
Doesn't matter. Okay, so modern oracle, and that's about tarot in there, yeah?
Just all different forms of divination.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So you had this business advice that was rubbish. You spent 10 grand and it didn't help you. And then you returned to your inner self and your intuition and realized, well, actually, I need to be listening to that because the ruling planet to your chart is Neptune, and your
Mm.
Neptune is located in your chart in the 10th house of career. So if I was giving you career advice, I'd say trust your inner self, trust your dreams, trust your because your Mercury's up there as well. And that, you need to have a psychic business because you've got a whole
Yeah.
cluster of planets there that would allow that to happen.
Mm.
Um, cool. Okay. And so when you because I watched one of your YouTube videos and you were talking about you were trying to get an audition or something with a new place that you were working at, and the lady that ran it you had to do a reading for, and you'd only got your new deck of cards. They sort of grabbed it off the Amazon delivery driver as you go towards the
Yeah.
reading. And I've had that happen. I've had to.
Mm.
I did a thing. It was called I can't remember the company now. But anyway, I had to do readings over the phone. They're called Psychic Solutions,
Yeah.
and I had to do readings over the phone. The lady that owned it, I had to do a reading for her, and I just did the playing cards and went blah 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 because I was so frightened, I mean, blah 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 blah. And she, well, yeah, that's good, you'll do, and that was it. She took me on. I couldn't believe it.
Mm.
But you had a similar experience yourself that you had
Yeah.
to read for this person. So, tell me a bit more about that. What was it like for you to have to read for this person to then be able to get some work from them?
So what had happened was that I was in the middle of another professional reading and my tarot cards just stopped working for some strange reason. I just couldn't connect anymore. So
Hmm.
then I was like, oh no, I better learn another method of divination because I had this test, right? So I
Hmm.
learned like Lenormand and my cards hadn't came in time and I was like, oh no, my cards haven't came. And as I was leaving the house, the delivery guy's coming up and I'm like, package is mine. And I was like, had to shuffle the cards on the bus and I literally took the shrink wrap off on the bus. So that was the first
Wow.
time that I'd actually read someone face to face.
Hmm.
Now, not face to face, I mean like with that method of divination. I'd obviously read
Right.
people like well before then kind of thing. But
Mm.
that was the first time I'd ever performed a reading with that system of divination, and I had to
Mhm.
do it like face to face. And I think that really that whole experience did actually change a lot of, well, it cemented a lot of suspicions that I had about divination, because I've always believed, right, that the best way to get experience in divination is just to do it, right? So you
Yes.
get so many people that they're so worried about, say for example, they'll learn astrology but they won't interpret someone else's chart for them for
Mm.
years. Do you know?
Mm.
They're
Mm.
too scared. Even like I once had a student who she came to me to learn like confidence and things like that, because she learned to row but she wouldn't perform a reading unless there was no one in her house. She was all alone. She
Mhm.
always read in the same room. She had all these really strange rituals, and I'm like, that's connected to a lack of confidence. That's not
Mm.
connected to anything other than that.
Yeah.
So I think that the experience really does highlight the fact that you have to just put yourself out there and see what happens. Do you know? You don't gain
Yes.
confidence by not
Mhm.
by waiting for the right time. If you're always waiting on the right time, it's just never going to happen. The
Never
right
gonna
time
happen.
is always right now. And yeah, like you says, I did actually get the job after all of that. She was like, "Oh, that was like really good," and it was probably was one of the best readings that I'd ever performed. And even by then, I'd been reading for a good like 15 years or something. Do you know? So it was really up there with one of my best readings. And even like other similar situations has happened to me as well. Like I'd once went for an interview for a phone line, and the woman had said to me, she's like, "Wow, you're actually good." And I was like, "All right." And I'd been so worried about it up until that point, like just
Mm.
panicking about it. But yeah, I think I don't know if it's maybe a mix between they're looking for a certain style of readings. So
Mm.
I specialize in like predictive divination. I like teach predictive divination. That's like my main focus, my main passion or whatever. And
Mhm.
I think phone lines, they like that style, I suppose. But Yeah, so
Yeah, because on the phone lines, I mean, the one I was on, they weren't allowed to keep the client on for longer than an hour. An hour was the
mm,
maximum. I can't remember what happened. I think it just all cut out when you got to an hour, because it was something mad like £1 a minute back then, and
yeah,
that was a lot of money. So they didn't. I think there was some sort of law or whatever. You weren't allowed to keep them on. But they'd have people that would then ring off and then ring again and hope it was somebody else different at the head office that would allow them to have a second reading, because people would get addicted to it. It was
yeah.
horrible. But okay, so tell me more about predictive
Hmm.
style of divination. Tell me more, because I would have thought most divination is predictive well, no, actually, maybe not, because if you're psychic, you could tell a person about themselves and what's happening now, what happened in the
Hmm.
past. But you're
Yeah.
teaching predictive divination. So tell me some more about that. That's interesting.
Well, I had always approached divination from the mindset that regardless of whether you were given advice or not, it was impossible to not make predictions, right? So even when you're given advice, you're thinking, oh, well, this might happen. So I'm going to give you this advice based on what I think is going to happen in the future.
Hmm.
Now, to me, that's pretty obvious. And I actually think that it's probably a big cultural difference between, say, like me or like an American reader or whatever,
Hmm.
because there are people that read tarot or read Lenormand or whatever, but they will try to convince you that prediction is impossible, do you know, or that you can't make predictions. And prediction is just a skill, do you know? Prediction is
Hmm.
just an aspect of divination. Personally, this sounds judgmental, right? But personally, I don't really understand why someone would want to learn divination and not make predictions, but there are people out there who are very vocal about being very anti prediction or anything in the whole realm of prediction.
Mm. Well, it's a very dicey subject. I don't know if you know, but you've probably heard of the Vagrancy Act of 18 something or other, that you
Mm.
can be prosecuted under. This is in the UK. I don't know if it applies in Scotland. Not too sure, but I know it's in England. And I was threatened with that
Yeah.
once, the Vagrancy Act, and no, not as an astrologer, mind. This was when I used to read palms. But they're using it now on people that are homeless. But under the Vagrancy Act, one of the blurbs about it is that fortune telling, anybody that
Mm-hmm.
fortune telling, they use the word fortune telling. They don't say astrology or card readings or psychic, where they say fortune telling is illegal. And there was an astrologer called Alan Leo quite a long time ago. So he was in the Victorian era, I think, and he was prosecuted twice under it. And the first time he got let off, and the second
Mm-hmm.
time he didn't. And that was because he'd written a report for someone, and he'd said in there, that you're more likely to have this type of work, and this is what is going to, so talking about stuff in the future, and then that was classified as being the illegal thing. And the second time, because the first time he managed to get off, the second time he didn't, and then he died a little while later. That's how bad it is. But it's a funny thing about predicting. Okay, so
Yeah.
predictive, because you can tell someone something's going to happen, and they will make sure it happens because you've told them. Yeah.
Mm.
Or you can tell somebody that something's going to happen and it doesn't happen. Do you know, I did a rune reading for a lady once, and then a few weeks later she came back. She was so cross. She said, "You didn't tell me my camper van was going to get stolen, broken into." And I went, "I'm sorry, but there isn't a card in the window that would have indicated that." She was so cross. And this was just a woman I worked with. This wasn't somebody that had paid for a session. It would be different if being a paid for a session. "You didn't tell me my camper van was going to get broken into." And it was like everything else that I told her, she'd completely forgotten. She just remembered that I hadn't said this. I said lots of other stuff. But in the predictions that you're doing, what sort of areas are you going to be covering? You're going to be covering like getting married, having children, having jobs, or more detailed than that?
Well, and I'm sure that years after that act was brought out, they'd sort of clarified. There's like a more updated version of it
Yeah,
that
the
says that
Mediumships Act.
in
Yeah.
the UK, it's related to making predictions related to like health or to make predictions related to like financial matters. So
Hmm.
I always stayed away from anything related to that, just to cover myself. But even like one of my students last week had asked about that. They'd asked about because when I run my courses, I do this thing where every week they can ask like questions, and
Mm.
we'll just do like a live on like the webinar software, and I'll go through it with them. and one of them had asked a lot of questions related to like health. How do you know what card would predict this or what would predict that? And I'm like, listen, I don't even think that I could even talk about that. Do you know? Like, so I just tend to stay away from any subject that is a bit like iffy and that thing. I tend to, and to be honest with you, most people that want readings tend not to want to know about those things. It's always usually relationships and career. They're the two
Yeah.
things, especially business. So if you come across someone who's in business, that's quite a big sector in the divination industry, is people who want like business readings or whatever. So I tend to give those examples to my students, like for a business reading, you would read that way. And then that covers me, but then it covers them as well, because they're not learning things which they can't actually use, you know, because I'm sure that the whole health reading thing is the same in other countries as well. They can't make health statements or anything like that. In some other countries, it's not as common as the UK or that, but there are countries where they're not allowed to make health claims based on like psychic readings.
Yeah, you see, that's different for me because I'm also an alternative therapist.
Yeah.
So I use a form of astrology called medical astrology. It's got nothing to
Yeah.
do with medicine, that's just what it's called. And I will go through where the person is now with their health and what would be the best way for them to sort it out. But it is not a good idea to be telling people, oh, you're going to get cancer, unless, for instance, I mean, I think, but what is the point in having a reading with someone if you don't warn them that something that they're doing at the moment might be detrimental to even their emotional health? Like, I don't think it's a good idea for you to stay with this person. Now, I've had to say that a lot to clients. You're not compatible with this person. They're not treating you well. You're having a difficult time. Are you sure you want to be with them? You know, because there's always there's always the difficulty when you're doing relationship astrology, is that the person doesn't want to dump the boyfriend or the girlfriend or whatever because they're worried they'll never find anybody else, so they'll
And they're
stay
like
in the bad
19-year-old or
relationship.
something, you know.
Yeah,
They're like
and they'll
19 and they think their life's over.
exactly, and they'll stay with the person for absolutely yonks because they're worried, you know. And I just sort of think, well, you know, maybe have a bit of time apart or whatever. But going back to the health and the money side of things, well, obviously, you know, I'm not financially qualified, so I don't give. But there is a segment in the chart that is to do with finances.
Yeah.
So that's the second house, which in your chart is starts in the sign of Aries and is ruled by Mars, and your Mars is located in your right next door to your MC, which means that you're going to be more active about the money that you make from your business. And then the eighth house in your chart which is other people's money investment, starts in the sign of Libra, which is ruled by Venus, and then your Venus is located in your 11th house of groups. So you invest your energies into working with groups. So you're not teaching one-on-one, I presume, is it?
No, it's very rare for me to teach one-on-one. It is like there's the odd time I've taught one-on-one, but I do prefer to teach in groups, because a lot of the times, a lot of my students, well, all of my students are all at different stages, but the stage that they're at is very subjective, right? So I could say to one of them who's maybe got like all of this experience reading other people, I could talk to them and they could be like, oh yeah, I'm a beginner, right? But then you can meet an absolute beginner and then be like, yeah, I'm a beginner too. But the questions that they all have at different stages really do align with like the beginner stage. So there's obviously things that a beginner wants to know that someone who's a little bit more advanced doesn't want to know. Do you know? So I like the whole group aspect because it can cover questions that the beginners are going to have like later down the line. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I feel like it's so much better as well, especially considering the fact that it's hard for someone to like self-select, well, I'm a beginner or I'm an intermediate or I'm an advanced. Sometimes they don't know that until they are surrounded by other people who are at the same level as them or less than them or more than them or whatever. So teaching groups is always just so much better. I just prefer to teach groups.
Yeah, and it'll suit your chart as well because your son's in the 11th house, and the 11th house is about groups.
It's quite funny, right? Because when I talk to someone, I don't like talking to people one-on-one.
Right.
There's something about my personality. I don't like the maybe it's the intimacy of it that I don't like. I've never really been keen on talking to people one-on-one. And even growing up, so I'd learned this sounds like a bit sexist or whatever, right? But
Mhm.
as like a young girl, the other girls like in my class or whatever were quite like too much for me emotionally. They wanted to spend all their time with me or whatever when they were like my best friends, and I hated that. So my
Right.
best friends were two boys, and I never even had one best friend. It was two of them, do you know? So I would spend
Mhm.
my time with the two of them, never like one of them,
Mhm.
like individually. Do you know what I mean? And then growing up, I realised that when I started my business and things, that I liked to teach a group as opposed to teaching like one on one. I'm actually more comfortable the more people that's there. And it's so strange
Mm.
because most people I know are the complete opposite of that. So even like take my twin, she's very much, she always had like close one on one girlfriends and stuff like that. Whereas I was just always the complete opposite of that.
Mm. Yeah, I've got a son in the seventh. I do like working one on one, and I do teach astrology one on one, and I have done it in groups, but I absolutely prefer it one on one because I hear what you're saying about the levels of knowledge. There is there's definitely beginner in astrology and there's definitely expert, if
Yeah.
only just to get your head around all the different things like houses and aspects
Mm-hmm.
and transits and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But I definitely take what you're saying as well, that people think they're beginners. People come to me and say, I'm a beginner. And I said, well, how many episodes of the podcast have you listened to? Because there's 260 something now. And they go, oh, I've listened to up to, I don't know, episode number 200 and something. I said, well, have you got that far?
Yeah.
That's a lot of listening. But
Mm-hmm.
they only have to listen to the first 20 to grasp what astrology is all about. So the first 20 are the most listened to episodes. Um, but you've got, yeah, so just going back to your chart for a minute, you've got a couple of planets that are retrograde. So you've got Venus retrograde and Jupiter retrograde. So Venus is the planet of love and affection and money and all the rest of it. And it's in the sign of Aquarius, I think. Oh, no, beg your pardon. Your Venus is in Capricorn and it's retrograde in your 11th house of friendship. And I did a whole podcast on retrograde Venus. So that was just a couple of episodes ago. So you might want to have a listen to that. But your Jupiter is in the sign of Cancer. I'll just translate this in a minute. You've got Jupiter in Cancer, retrograde in your fourth house of home. So this is your family, your roots. This is how you grow up, okay? The family that you come from. And Jupiter's the lucky planet, but it's retrograding, okay, in your chart.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also in the sign of Cancer. So there's sort of, when you're growing up, there's a culture that you're part of or a philosophy that you're part of that in some respects you're going to kick back against. So what was it like for you being part of the gypsy community when you were small?
I think that might actually be related to being mixed race.
Right.
So my mum is the Romany Gypsy, and my dad is actually mixed Scottish and French. But my
Mm-hmm.
dad was about 16 when he got with my mum, and his parents and his siblings and stuff stopped. We didn't talk to them basically, like growing up. Maybe the odd time or whatever, but it wasn't like they were huge parts of our lives. Do you know, like what my
Yeah.
mum's family was? So I actually, even this sounds really horrible, but I get defensive if anyone refers to me anything than other than being Romany, because in my mind, like I am Romany. I was brought up
Mm.
with like my mum and that. Even my granny lived with us. My great granny lived in the yard next to the house. Like our whole families are just always on top of each other. Our
Mm-hmm.
culture, our language, everything. We were brought up like Romany.
Mm.
So yeah, I am like that. We are, and if someone, because I live in Scotland, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people will say things about like, oh yeah, you're like Scottish and like your Scottish DNA, and that just like infuriates me. I'm like, no, I am Romany, you know, I'm fucking Romany. Like I'm not, in my mind, like I'm not anything
Mm.
culturally related to like my dad's family at all. So
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
that is accurate. That's
Yeah.
very accurate.
You've got and I just love the whole gypsy thing. So you have to excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a gypsy fanatic because I found you on Twitter because there'd
Yeah,
been the thing with the comedian whose name I can't remember, and he'd made that awful joke which wasn't a
yeah,
joke. And I already follow a couple of gypsy organisations because I'm a member of the
yeah,
what's called the Travelling Homeopaths Collective. I volunteer for them. We do homeopathy at festivals like Glastonbury, for instance. So we come across a lot of travelling people that work at festivals
Oh
And
yeah,
it's
we
not,
love a festival.
yeah, and people that work at festivals are also a part of the traveling community because they travel from one festival to another. So I've immersed
Yeah.
myself in that culture. And when I was younger, I used to read books by a Romany gypsy. Now my mind's gone blank and I can't remember his name. But there was a fellow and he was an astrologer as well, and he wrote a number of books about astrology, and he had a Petrolengro, that was it. So
Yeah, I was going to say it. I knew it. I knew that's who you were talking about because they're quite well known
yeah,
astrologers.
yeah.
They're well known for their astrology.
Yeah, and he's gypsy, and it's the whole sort of the moving thing, the moving from place to place, which isn't understood in the UK and the gypsy community. Because I've done all the research for it as well. I had to do for a funding application. That the gypsy community are the most discriminated against in our country anyway. Always has been, which is absolutely just horrendous. People don't understand the culture behind it, or that there is even a culture.
Yeah.
Which is sad upon sad upon sad. And so when you popped up and then you were talking and you were gypsy, I thought, oh, how cool! I need to see you. What's it like being part of the gym? But I saw a post that you made the other day. Was it about something that? Oh, that's right. Tell me about the hip thing, about the hip hurting. Tell me that story. The hip.
Oh well, I developed arthritis when I was like 23.
Oh,
So but my granny also has arthritis, right? And my granny's like hardcore old fashioned, right? Like they really are like old fashioned. And they think in gypsy culture everything has a cause, right?
yeah.
So it doesn't matter that you've got arthritis. They think there's also some other like cause. They understand that it's caused by your bones deteriorating, but they think that you having certain thoughts can cause something to like hurt or to break or to be ill. So for example, right, my granny was going on about this sore hip, and we were all sort of having like a bit of a joke about like this sore hip and everything, right? And then I developed this sore hip, and one of my sisters says to me, she's like, that's because a granny and her sore hip, and you were like talking about her sore hip, and I'm like, but they honestly believe that, like I can remember being younger, my granny had this really bad cold, and then I had the cold not long after it, and the thing is, they understand that you catch the cold, right? But they're not interested in how, right? They're interested in why, right? Like
Oh,
why you
okay.
have
Yeah.
it.
So why did you
So
get the cold?
she was furious at me. She's like, "Oh, that's you like thinking about me being spiteful when I had the cold, and that's what you get, That's an attitude, like that's what you get."
Oh, so like a form of punishment, you mean? Oh, how
Yeah,
funny.
I think it's that. Yeah, it's basically the only way to describe it would be like divine retribution.
Got ya.
Like you're not giving someone sympathy for this, so then you will develop that. But it actually makes travelers are very, very superstitious when it comes to things like that. And to them, it's like a reality. So when we were younger, we had it like drummed into us really hardcore, like not to pick on people with disabilities or anything like that, because they're like, listen, if you do that, you'll have a child that's like that. If you're going to be like discriminating against people for their disabilities or picking on people or laughing at people that have disabilities, they're like, don't ever do that. Like they were really, really funny with us with anything related to that. They're like,
But
if you do something bad to someone else, or if you're thinking bad about someone else, like it'll come back to you. So watch what you're fucking doing.
well, actually, but I actually think that's, if you think about it energetically, that's probably the case anyway. If you're
Yeah,
putting out negative thoughts out into the world, they'll flipping well bounce back to you. So I
yeah.
don't actually think that that's such a weird a thought system to have actually. And there's a thing called sympathetic magic, which you might have heard of, that you can and people do get ill because other people are ill, and they're not even with the other person. They'll get the same illness because they're thinking about it. Whatever. I mean, don't get into, because I've worked in the health sector for a long time. So, what happens to people's bodies and stuff, because and then the other thing, there's a lady, she wrote a lovely book, Your Body Speaks Your Mind. So you can have a pain, and if you go further into the pain, with hip, or what's my hip all about? Well, it's holding my legs up. What's my legs? So it was all about walking, and what is it? Where is it I want to walk to or walk from, or and you start asking all these questions, and then the person will have a light bulb moment. It's like, oh well, actually, maybe I feel like I'm not walking my path or whatever. There's all these metaphors that happen. But yeah, I like that. But
See, there might be some truth to that, because the pain in my hip, I do have arthritis in my hip already, but I've got quite bad swelling on the inside in one particular bit. And the way where it is, it's just painful all the time. So it's painful when you lie down, painful when you sit, painful when like they've told me that it won't heal if I'm sitting down. So I've got to spend like weeks standing up. Basically, it's terrible because I need to sit down for my work or whatever. But it started to get that swelling bit happened round about the time that I'd put in my mortgage application.
Oh, the
So, and
stress.
we'd found like a new house, and there's part of me that feels a bit weird about moving to a new house, because now my mum and dad are in the house next to us. My granny's down the stairs, like my uncle is over the bit. So we've all always lived on top of each other. And even though I'm not moving far away, I am not going to be like in this cluster of homes anymore, like with my family and things. Now going to be like away, and me and like my fiance is like starting our new like life kind of thing, eh? And there is a part of me that's sort of like, that's a bit weird. Like we're going to somewhere different when we've never been anywhere different,
And how far away will you be from your family?
Oh, like 10 minutes. It's
Oh,
not even
okay.
like a 10-minute walk, literally. But I feel a bit weird about not being next to everyone. Do you know what I mean
Yes.
by that? And then that's when the hip pain had sort of started. So I don't know, there probably is like some truth to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I'd recommend if you were a client, I'd say write your hip a letter. So write a letter to your hip, what it feels like, and what might be there, and then burn the letter. Sort of, my hip feels like this, feels like that, and I've got these issues going on. And then just burn the piece of paper so that you're releasing it and letting it go. Because a lot of, I mean, don't want to get into too much, but a lot of things to do with pain isn't actually, because pain gets worse. Okay, pain doesn't, when you're in a painful situation, it tends to get worse. It doesn't just get better. Maybe a headache will come and go, but most people, when they're in pain with something, what then happens is there's the emotions associated with the pain, and they're worse. So what I always do in homeopathy is I'll give them the emotional upset remedy. It's called Ignatia, Ignatia, not echinacea, which is for a cold, but Ignatia, so that at least they're not feeling emotionally attached to the pain.
Yeah.
Because you can be attached to your pain. You can be thinking about it all the time and then trying not to think about it, and that doesn't work either. But if you can help somebody with the emotional side of it, there's flower essences, there's homeopathic remedies, there's quite a few things that will help. Or even just get the person to talk about their pain, what else is causing you pain, which you've managed to describe quite eloquently there, that you're not going to be part of that close-knit thing. Now, I come from a large family. There were 5 of us, okay? Catholic parents were busy producing children. And I'm the middle child in 5, okay? So there were always lots of people going around. Now, I'm quite okay being on my own, but I've got a younger sister, okay? So she's got 3 people that are older than her. And she has never lived on her own, and she's an Aquarius. And the one time she did live on her own, she felt totally out of place. Now she's gay. She lives in a house which is all women in there. There's about 6 of them, and she's lived there for something stupid like 30 years in this one location. But it's because all these people are around her. She's so used to it, because like it would have been at home in her family, she's absolutely recreated this in her adult life, which I think is really funny.
It's really funny because there seems to be 2 parts to my personality. So on the one hand, I like to be alone. I like my favorite pastime is to think, right? So I like to think thoughts, and I'm really like into my own head and into my own interests and stuff like that. But then I view like my culture and things as being quite a large part of like who I am. Do you know what I mean? So I like that aspect too, of always having like my family around. There's always people coming in and out and things like that. Even though I like to be on my own, it's like so bizarre. I think I would never choose to be on my own. Do you know what I mean? But and if me and David, like if we weren't together, it would be like, well, I'll just stay here with my family. Do you know? So yeah, it's really strange.
And yeah, going back to your Jupiter in Cancer, that your belief is within your family. Your family beliefs are important to you. So what you've inherited and what your culture determines for you is important for you. Cool. Now, what's the other thing I was going to ask you? Okay, so let's talk about Pluto. So when you were born, Pluto was in your ninth house, and it's spent a long time. It takes a long time to go through each sign of the zodiac. So it's in Scorpio and born. It's perfectly happy there, and you've been under the influence of it. Now in 2008, it started to go into the sign of Capricorn, and I think that was when it triggered off your Uranus. So what was you? Maybe your Mars as well? No, your Uranus. What was going on for you in 2008? I know it's a while ago.
That was round about the time that I had my daughter when I was 15, and then I went back to school,
Mhm.
and I thought that I wanted to do all of that, right? I thought that I was just a difficult child because I always hated school, right? And I was quite, like I said, I was quite rebellious and things. So I thought that that was just because I was difficult, all right? So
Mhm.
after I had my daughter and I'd sort of like settled down and things, I was like, right, fuck it, I'm going to go back to school and things. And then I started to experience all of these blocks when it came to progressing. So at that time, I was at college, and then it was around about the time that I was to decide if I was going to go to university or not. And I'd actually had a dream. I had this dream that I was walking down down this hallway at a university, and then I came to all the doors were closed, and I came to this one door, and it says like your classroom, right? So I entered into this classroom, and then I'm standing in this classroom, and all like the walls start to break away, and suddenly I'm on top of this hill. It's like torrential rain and everything. And then there's all these cows on the hill as well, and they were like diseased and dying and trampling over each other, trying to get like up the hill and everything. It was just so horrible. And when I woke up, I thought to myself, I thought that's a sign like not to apply for university because I'd had that dream.
Mm, mm.
And if I actually hate to think what would have happened if I would have applied for university because I absolutely love what I do now. Absolutely love it. To be honest with you, I think that I would have still ended up doing the same thing, but I think I would have had a lot of debt. Do you know, I would have
Right.
had like the university, I
Mm.
would have had the university debt.
And it's
So
big. Yeah.
yeah. And
University debt's
it
big.
all worked out well because my chronic pain and things had actually started when I was about, I think like 23, 24.
Mhm.
So if I would have had a regular job after university, I wouldn't have been able to stick to it. There's absolutely no way I would have been able to stick to it in this pain. But when you work for yourself, you can sort of make your own accommodations and work at the right
Yes.
time and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that all of that sort of is the main thing I think that kick-started me to start working for myself was round about that time, was after having that dream.
Yeah, because in 2008, Pluto Uranus conjunction is Pluto's about deep change and transformation, and Uranus is about
Mm.
sudden things happening. So it was like a snap decision, so to
It
speak.
was,
And you've been under the influence of Pluto since then. So not up until then, but since then. So, and it's such a slow moving planet. You have now completely changed from being the person you were then to the person you are now, but you're
yeah,
going to be a much more happy bunny. But unfortunately, you had to go through that transition to be the person that you are now.
yeah,
I mean, Pluto's going to carry on going around the zodiac, but it won't be causing or reflecting so much difficulty in the chart. And that's the trouble when you do have a very clustered chart. When a planet transits past it, it's sort of like you're in the firing line. It's like, oh, what happens next, you know? But it's just coming to the end of Capricorn now, and then it's going to go into Aquarius. Um, so you'll be able to develop yourself even further, you know, so it will assist you in that rather than hold you back. And so with the people that you're teaching the tarot to, um, what sort of feedback do you get from them? Are they hoping to eventually become readers themselves? Is that the aim with the teaching?
a lot of my students say they'll just start as, some of them they're just hobbyists, right? So they just
Yeah.
love it as a hobby and they love their jobs. So even like last night, I was talking to one of my students. He works for like a huge law firm in the Emirates, and he has absolutely no intention on leaving his job or whatever. But he had said to me that like divination was, he felt like his calling, but he felt like he could pursue that calling while he was doing like his regular job. And it's
Mhm.
funny when he performs readings and things, they do have quite a strong financial, like a strong financial and legal element. You know, you could tell that he's a lawyer, so I feel like his things sort of like fits. But a lot of my students, yeah, they do go on to be readers, and some of them now. So I've been teaching full time since 2018, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of my students now have went on to teach themselves. Like now they teach like psychic development or whatever. So it's weird seeing them go from being like these beginners to now them teaching people and that too. So it's quite weird. And I always support my students going on for them to teach as well, because I like to see them progress and go for their callings or whatever. So
Yeah. It is nice seeing students do that. I had a lady that I taught astrology to a long time ago, and she's got a podcast now, and she does readings, and she wrote a column for a fashion magazine for a while, and she's had a baby recently, so things have slowed down a teeny bit. And yeah, it is lovely. Um, but going back to people making a living, the people that do it hobbyist as well, but there also people do it for personal development.
yeah,
There's something else that they want to learn to be able to do, which is what my auntie was. I mean, there was no way my auntie was ever going to be a professional astrologer, because she was a mum. That was her job. And then when my grandmother got a bit elderly, she looked after my granny, right up until she died. So well done, Auntie Jo. But there are other people that do want to make a living out of it, and they get so distressed right at the beginning that all of a sudden these clients just haven't appeared out of nowhere. And it's like,
yeah,
hello, it takes a bit of time. So I'm always telling people, don't give your job up, keep your
yeah,
day job until you get to a certain level, and then you can then become making a full income from it. Because when I started, I was a single mother, and I was doing the psychic readings over the phone and stuff. And eventually, I did work in retail for a time. And in the end, I actually got sacked from a job in a shop that I was working, and that was it.
yeah.
They'd sacked me. Well, okay, I better make a living out of this now. So
I
I got
have
sacked for having a
actually, I
cigarette.
couldn't get a job doing anything else. I literally would apply for hundreds, I mean hundreds of jobs every week. Couldn't get a job doing anything else, and that's why eventually I'd ended up starting like my business and stuff.
Mm,
And my family used to say to me at the time, you know, when I couldn't get this job, I used to get so depressed. All my friends had jobs, all my family had jobs. Like, I used to get so depressed, and they used to say to me, like, my mum and my granny would say things like, "There's something better for you out there." And they really believed it. They were like, "There's something
mm,
better. You're going to be doing something else. You'll do something that you love. You really will." And I just couldn't accept that. And even going back to like that dream that I had, I started to have doubt. I was like, was that a mistake? Like, did I
mhm,
make a mistake? Do you know what I mean? But then when I started my business and it took off compared to other people's business, my business actually did take off quite quickly. I realized that there was no mistakes. You know, they were right.
mm,
They were right that this was meant to be. And that's the thing as well. I always recommend to my students, but if they have a regular job, to keep it, because
mm,
it's, especially as a single parent, because I was a single parent, you know,
mhm,
and I had like no money, didn't have like two pennies to rub together. My
mm,
daughter's autistic as well.
mm,
So it was hard starting a business when you've not got anything. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
And if you have the money, if you have the extra money from a regular job to be able to put into your business will just grow like so much faster. Do you know,
mm.
it's a huge risk for someone to leave a steady job,
Yes.
especially nowadays when you don't really know
Mm,
what's going to happen with the economy and Brexit
mm,
and the virus and stuff. Like, people
mm,
don't know what's going to happen. So having the financial security of a job, and it will just help you to grow your business faster, because then you'll have money to put into it and things like that. Like, back when I started paying the £12 a month or whatever it was for website hosting, that was a big thing for
oh
me.
my God, you were paying
Big,
£12 a month.
yeah, that was such a big thing for me to invest
Mm,
that money. Do you know, such a big
yeah.
financial risk when you've not really got anything. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
But it did work out, so I can't complain, because like over 1 million people a year visit my website now, so it
wow.
worked out.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that's not to say that that works out for everyone. Do you know?
No, and I think you also need to be convinced that what you're doing is what you love doing. I mean, when I say I got the sack, I was working in retail. I had a cigarette outside the shop. The boss went ballistic because he caught me having the cigarette, and he literally sacked me on the spot. And I was like, "What am I going to do? I've got no money. I've got a kid. What happens now?" And I went to the Dole office and tried to sign on, and they said you can't have anything. You've got to wait. However, and I just stood and burst into tears. I didn't know what else. And I went home, and then I did get a letter in the post a few days later saying they'd give me the benefits and stuff. But at the time, I was absolutely, well, I'm going to have to go out and find another job again. And then I'd already done all of this. I had been doing all of this on the side, parties, friends, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, well, that's it. I'm going to have to do it. I did also train in homeopathy, so that happened later on. But making a business, I tried when I was 18 to make a business doing psychic readings. My boyfriend at the time gave me some little business cards, and I used to have people come around to my flat, and I'd take their handprints and charge them £5, which wasn't even enough to pay my rent, and that I learned the hard way at that point, that being self-employed is expensive. But when I returned to it when I was in my 30s and I started doing it, there was, once I'd launched myself into it, there was no way I was ever going to go back and work for someone ever again. It's just like, no, Jose.
That's like me. I just, this sounds so fucked up, right? But if I had it that I couldn't continue my business anymore, like that would mess with my whole sense of reality, because it's like a major part of even like my personality is that I am convinced that this is my destiny, and like this is what is meant to be for me, and it would make me second guess everything if it wasn't. Do you know, it really would. But the thing is that I've noticed that the people who they believe that it's their destiny and they're willing to do anything to make it work, they're the ones that they do end up having like really long careers and good careers and things like that. Whereas I think that if you have to be all in, you really have to be all in. You have to believe it. You have to feel it. You have to know it. You have to be like, this is for me. And if you don't have that attitude, then the smallest little thing will crack away at it, and you'll just be away doing something else.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to like it. It has to be fun. I love my job. I'm working with people from all over the world, and I can choose the hours that I work. It's all done on an app. I love doing the podcast, which is where this recording is going to be going. And I get a whole nearly an hour sometimes once a week to go waffle, waffle, waffle and say whatever I want. No one's telling me what to do. Well, I'm a bit of a show off. But it's when you get to a stage of loving your job, I did try and retire at one point because I'm now in my 60s, and it just didn't work. So my husband's, he keeps saying, don't retire, because I like, what am I going to do all day if I'm not working? What am I going to do? Anyway, I can't afford to retire. But the thought of stopping my business at some point and there's little bits of it that I've sort of changed and whatever, but no, it's taken me so long to get to where I am now. I don't want to let it go. It's my baby,
I think as well, when a subject like divination, it's not only your business, it becomes like your interests, and so there's so many subjects connected to divination that it's hard to get bored. So I was telling one of my students this yesterday, because they're like, well, where does the symbolism on the tarot cards like come from or whatever? And I said to him, well, to be honest with you, I actually think that a lot of the symbolism, it has like its origins in mythology. Do you know, from like thousands of years ago, Apollo and the sun or whatever, do you know? Even like the planets are heavily linked to astrology. And then from that, a lot of the symbolism is then based on like the myth. For example, like the whole the myth of the Minotaur, where he uses like the ball of string as a clue. Even now, if you dream of a ball of string, it represents like a clue, do you know? And that's like something that they take from like mythology.
Yes.
And the symbolism on the tarot cards does tend to tend to depict similar symbolism. So, and it's weird because I think a lot of people, they go into divination viewing it as separate subjects. So they'll view astrology as being a lot different from tarot, or Lenormand being a lot different from tea leaf reading, and they're all just these separate subjects that have nothing to do with each other. But the more systems of divination that you learn, the more that you start to realize that they're very alike. Like your
Yeah.
average person could
Yes.
never imagine how astrology is like palmistry. Do you know? They would be
Mm.
like, that makes
Mm.
absolutely no sense. And you're like, oh,
Mm-mm.
here's Mercury right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
then they're like, wow. So the more you learn about divination, you start to realize that they actually are all alike. And it's such a massive subject that it's hard to get bored. It really
Oh
is.
yeah. I mean, there's loads of different things. I mean, over the years, I've read people's foreheads. Okay,
Mm.
just their foreheads. Sticks. The way that sticks drop. I've done tea leaves. I've done cards. Obviously, all different forms of it. But like you say, in my job, because I do psychic readings, I do astrology readings, and I'm a homeopath, so I'm a professional trained homeopath. So I work with people's health issues as well. So that there's always this juggling within my own business. To if
Mm.
I'm not that I ever do get bored, but there'll always be something interesting coming up. But as far as divination goes, I mean, I've got shelves of books here about all different forms of it. And it's never ending. And then there's things like the I Ching. Is it called the I Ching or the I Chi or whatever I think
Yi Chang, I think it's
that's
pronounced.
the one. Thank you. Yeah, that. There's all these different forms. So ever since man or humans were invented, they wanted to have some method to be able to make a life that's chaotic, because
Mm-hmm.
life is chaotic, nothing is predictable. They want to be able to make some sort of sense of it. So the early Babylonians 2000 years ago were busily looking up at the sky and seeing what the planets were up to, but then other people were doing things by, like tossing
Understand.
coins, or yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then cards came up and people started reading those, but people were reading people's hands as well since the year dot. This line here means that, and you're going to have 6 kids and you're going to marry when you're 12 or whatever. It's yeah, I think it's innate in human beings anyway to want
Yeah.
to know what's going to happen, because the bottom line to that is they want to know, am I going to be okay? Because the
Mm.
major question that people are asking, is this going to be okay? Is that going to be okay? Can I have the reassurance to that? And which divination will allow you to determine how long something will last for. Yeah.
I read an article not too long ago, and it was about I think it was the Guardian or something like that. It was and it was about how now years ago when archaeologists had first discovered the cave art like in
Yeah.
Europe of like the bulls and stuff like that, they assumed that it was animals that were running around that was depicted.
Mm.
But that recently they've done like maps of the stars and that they think they were actually depicting like constellations.
Mm.
Even, and that was back in what, 18,000 years ago. Even Gulpeki, how is it pronounced? Gulpeki Teke. They
Mm-hmm.
says that a lot of the animals, so they have like scorpions and things like that, they think is actually meant to depict like Scorpio and stuff based on where it was in the sky. And that's going back to like 11,000 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's like really people. I am convinced. I am honestly convinced that spirituality and divination and things like that, it's been around as long as what humans have been
Of
around.
course it has. I mean, look at Stonehenge. I mean, I don't live
Mm-hmm.
too far away from it because I live in Bath. I mean, it's only up the road from it. And I've visited there lots. So I go there with a pagan group every now and
Yeah.
again. And a few times I've been there the first day of summer. So it's the first day of Cancer. And to actually see, I was crying, but to actually see the sun rising and landing on the heel, it's called the heel stone within there. And
Mm-hmm.
you think, this is thousands of years ago. They constructed these rocks are enormous. They've dragged them here, they've placed them exactly. So now, thousands of years later, the sun still comes up on the Hillstone, and you're watching it come. It's just so amazing. You think, how did they do that then? Like, we've got to use an app on our phone or something to be able to determine when the first day of summer is. But they'd already worked it out, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
Stonehenge was created for. That, amongst other things. And around where I live in Somerset, there's other stone circles. Don't get me started, but there's a lovely one, and it's called Stanton Drew, and that was a place where you went along and you just had a party. So I'll see you at the stones, when the sun is here and whatever. And they were stone circles were places like, now you'd go to the dance, but then you went, I'll meet you at the stones and we'll do this and we'll celebrate and stuff. So stone circles weren't always to do with things to do with the sun or whatever, but they were also places to meet up. And I just, but yeah, people have been doing paying attention to signs for an awfully long time, and I think, yeah, we need to listen to them a bit more in this modern world with with all the noise. Maybe we should go back those types of ideas, that there is an answer to things. And the reason I like astrology, not that I don't like other forms of divination, because I do, but the reason I like astrology so much is that it in the chaos of the world that we've got, there is an explanation. So when you ask, like, why did such and such a happen on March the 25th of 1967? Well, it's because Mercury was transiting over here, so that you can have a sort of a reason for something. Otherwise, everything just seems to be so totally random. And I don't think life is random. I think there's certain things that are, inverted commas, meant to be, and that's where divination comes in. It's like, are you on your path? Are you going in the right direction? How are you going to get there? Type of stuff.
Yeah, because when I was young, when I first found out what like Mercury retrograde and things was, I used to think like that people just blowed it out of proportion or whatever. But anytime I said that, right, and something would happen. Something would happen, and I would be like, and I actually think I'm quite sensitive now. Knowing
Yeah.
what Mercury retrograde is, I actually think I'm quite sensitive to it, more so than what
Mm.
a lot of other people are. I don't know if it's because I work online or whatever, do you know? But even with the whole palmistry thing, so take like your pinky finger is associated with Mercury, and
Yeah.
I've got a scar down that part of my hands, like from an accident, and and someone had says to me when I was younger, they said either you're going to work in technology, they said, or you'll hate technology, right? They says it would go like either way. I grew up hating technology, and I still do it now. I hate like printers and things like that, which is so bizarre because I work online at the same time. So it was like they were right. You know, they were right in like
You
both
got a
ways.
love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah, I do. Like anything connected to technology never goes right for me. I'm one of those people, never ever goes right for me, right? I've always got to figure out a workaround with everything, right? But then I work online. I developed like my own website and stuff like that. And most of my family can't even read or write. You know, when I tell folk I created my website myself, they're like, Jesus Christ. You know? So yeah, I did develop that two aspects of it. And they're quite strong aspects too. Do you know, like um very prominent in my life, like my hate of technology, but then also working online.
Well, I mean, astrologically, it'd be Uranus. Uranus is the planet that governs technology, and Mercury is how you think. And in your chart, they're very close together.
Yeah.
So, but they're, well, not but in addition, they're in an Earth sign. So you want to have a practical application of it. So, people use the internet and technology for all different reasons, but in your case, yours is because of your business. That's why you got it. So you're going to push past the hating it type of thing to having to be able to use it.
If I didn't have my business, I wouldn't use social media or anything like that. Anything at all. If I didn't have my business, I would just be one of those people that's like sees like are no interest in it whatsoever. And it's funny because my daughter's like that too. She's six. She's like the only 16-year-old that I know that doesn't use social media because she's not interested in it at all.
Well, good, because there's not
And
a lot
I'm quite lucky because I know some people who have autistic children and their children have become like obsessed with like the online world, and that's like their whole world and things like that. It's so weird that Candice is the complete opposite of that. So I'm actually quite lucky that way, I think.
Excellent. Well done. So thank you very much for chatting with us today, Lisa. It's been really, really interesting talking to you. So I'll put in the show notes the website address to get you. But can you just tell us what your website address is?
It's divinationandfortunetelling.com.
And is and spelled A-N-D?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So divination and
fortunetelling.com.
Oh, that tells you everything. That's a great domain name, isn't it? Well done.
You know how I'm just going to quickly tell you this,
Yeah,
but
go.
how I chose my website name was I was typing up on the computer different ideas for website names, and as I typed divination and fortune telling, I heard the words being said on the television. Someone said divination and fortune telling, and apparently that's a form of divination known as cladonism when you when you make decisions based on the things that you overhear, like overhearing passages or whatever. So that's why the website's called that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's clairaudience. Yeah, there are people that will hear things. Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's clairaudience, there's clairvoyance, there's all different types of ability. It's not just seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling. You can get all of the senses involved. Thank you. So I'm going to stop recording, but we'll talk a bit more in a minute. But thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today. Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed
Bye.
it. Thanks. Bye bye now.